Hello, welcome to the Chapter 1 video on the topic of SQ3R. In Chapter 1, we'll be covering a number of different topics, including SQ3R, which is a system for taking notes and reading your textbooks. We'll also go on in future lessons to talk about underlining, highlighting, and annotating in an effective way. We'll talk about paraphrasing, as well as effective use of the web. So SQ3R is a system that has been around for over 50 years. SQ3R is a way that you approach your textbooks so that you never ever read another textbook with empty hands. You should always have paper and a pencil or a pen available to you. Now SQ3R, as you can imagine, is a number of steps. The first step is survey. And that's to get an idea of what this chapter is going to be about. The next step will be to question, the third to read, the fourth to recall, and the fifth to review. Let's take a look at each of these steps in depth. There are really 4 goals for the survey. The first thing that you want to do is to get a general overview of the material. And you need to be able to determine how difficult or easy the text might be to read. You try to get an idea of what the author seems to think is important, and then this enables you to determine how many study sessions it's going to take to read this chapter. For an example, if I were to sit down and read a chemistry text, it would take me far longer and would be far more challenging than if I were to read a literature text. That has to do with my background, and each of us has our own background strengths that we draw from. So if confronted with that chapter from chemistry, I know that I'm going to break that chapter down into probably 5-page segments so that I can take my time with it and then get up, move around in between each of those segments to allow the information to sort of gel, as it were. So whenever you start a study session, you decide how many pages you plan to read at a time. And then you build in purposeful breaks that you're going to be giving yourself after you've reached each goal as you continue to read. The idea of building in breaks is an important one. And the idea of planning what you're going to do with those breaks is also important. If it takes you 10 minutes to walk your dog for 10 minutes. If it takes you, 5 minutes to make yourself a quick snack, do that. If you want to do a quick 5 minutes from an exercise video, go for it. Whatever it is, just know that you're going back to the next task then, which would be the next section of the reading that you've set up for yourself. You might also consider shifting to a different setting in your home or in your apartment as you read each section of the text. By shifting the location, it actually forces our brain to do a little bit more work, which is to get adjusted to a new environment while we're continuing with this subject. And that actually helps us to learn the information and retain it at a deeper level. And then you can also review the section that you just finished before you start the new section. So to survey, what you need to do is to look at the title and the introductory material in the chapter. Almost all textbooks have some, a paragraph or 2 of introduction before they actually get into the meat of the chapter. And then you need to recognize the headings and the opening sentences of chapter sections. You need to look at the visual aids such as pictures and charts and graphs and marginal notes that might be there. A lot of times textbooks today will put vocabulary words in the marginal notes, which is really important to take note of. There's also end of chapter summaries and questions. All of this survey step should take you no more than 5 minutes at the very most. But by the time you get done with that survey step, your brain has created sort of an architecture for the chapter. You know what's going to be coming up in different sections. You know basically what the the topics are going to be that will be discussed. And so you have prepared yourself to read the chapter. And with this preparation, you'll do so much more in terms of retaining information. So what I'd like you to do right now is to make sure that you have available a copy of the Chapter 12 sample text from a health textbook. I want you to have that handout handy because you're going to be doing a number of things with it. So if you need to pause the video right now, please do so. So if you have someone you can discuss this with, all the better, because the research tells us that we learn even more when we're working with another person. But if you're doing this solo, that's fine. You'll be able to work with it as well, too. What I want you to do before you even start your survey of Chapter 12 is to be able to look for things that the graphic designers did to try to make the chapter's organization clear to you. I want you to be able to identify how many headings there are in the chapter and how many subheadings there are as well. So pause the video now and survey in about 5 minutes the Chapter 12, which is a sample of a health text. So, what kinds of things did you notice that the graphic designers of this textbook did to try to lead you through the chapter in an effective way? One of the things you should have noticed is the use of color. If you look into the handout on page 217, you'll notice that the key vocabulary words are in red. And you have one of those marginal notes where you have at the bottom of page 217, you have the vocabulary words as well as the definitions for them. Other things that you might want to notice is that they have put the headings and subheadings in a dark boldface color. Now, how can you tell the headings from the subheadings? How many headings did you find? How many subheadings did you find? If you said 5 headings and 8 subheadings, you're absolutely correct. So how does that figure? Well, if you look on page 2, well, let's start at the very beginning. On page 216, it says Themes of Care. That is the title of the chapter. But just in a bit of a way to confuse us, it's also the first heading of this chapter. So if you look at page 217, Themes of Care appears in all capital letters, in boldface, and in a dark blue color. When you look at the word communication, also on page 217, that is in boldface, but it's a combination of a capital letter and lowercase letters. That means that that is the signal to us that it's a subheading. So on that page, we have 1 heading and 1 subheading. On page 218, we have 3 subheadings. So after we've finished surveying, we're ready then to start, reading the actual chapter. But before we do that, we're going to get ourselves ready by asking some key questions that we want to find out based on the survey that we just did. So these questions that we ask will help us to keep active while we're reading the chapter. So often people will, if they're faced with a 40-page chapter in a text, they'll just simply treat it like a punishment and force themselves to go through it all in one sitting. That's the worst thing that you can do for yourself. You need to build in those breaks, chunk the chapter up, depending on what kind of background knowledge you have. And then you need to have pen and paper in hand. By formulating questions, you'll keep your concentration going, and it'll help you to tie in what all the different passages in the chapter are about. Now, the kinds of questions you ask are usually going to be based on headings. They could also be based on key words, your vocabulary words. Sometimes we write questions about pictures or graphics that are in the chapter. And you can also draw questions from your own personal experience. Maybe you've taken a course in this particular content before, and so you have questions of your own that you'd like to pose. And then always rely on those journalistic questions that you learned back in high school, the 5 W's and the 1 H. Who, what, why, where, when, and how. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little bit of practice with that. I want you to take a look at the picture in figure 12.3, which is on the top of page 218. I want you to look at the picture, but I also want you to read the cut line just below the picture. And again, if you're working with a partner, great. If you're doing this solo, that's fine. What I want you to do is to create a question about the picture that will most likely be answered in the reading. I'll give you a moment to do so. So pause the video while you jot down what question you might ask. And as I look at that picture, of course, the thing that I notice first of all is that there's a person in scrubs and she's holding a curtain, and I see a person who looks probably like the patient in the bed. And the cut line says, maintaining the resident's privacy shows the resident you respect them. Well, my question would be, what are the ways that I have to protect a patient's privacy? What are the specific things that I need to do in order to make that happen? So then as I read that section, I'm going to be looking for the answer to that question as I go along. The next thing I'd like you to do is to make sure you have a printed copy of the Cornell note-taking paper that was provided. And if you haven't done so, please pause the video and get that Cornell note-taking paper now. And as you look at the Cornell note-taking paper, what you see is a column on the left for questions that you might pose, and then a generous section on the right for you to take notes. And then a little further down, a square that has a place for you to write a summary. The way that Cornell note-taking paper works is that you turn the headings from the chapter into questions, and then you read to find the answer to those questions. So I would suggest that you look at the first heading, which in chapter 12, which again is on page 217. The heading is Themes of Care, and formulate a question based on that heading. And jot that down under the question column. So do that now. And then you are ready to go on to the read step. In this section, step 3 in the SQ3R process, you're going to be reading, but instead of just simply reading with your empty hands, you're going to have a pencil and a paper handy, your Cornell note-taking sheet, as well as a pen, and you're going to read to find the answers to your questions. So you'll read until you find the answer to your first heading. When you come to the second heading, you'll pause and turn that into a question as well. No matter what the topic is, and no matter how familiar you are with it, never let yourself read more than 10 to 15 pages at a time. Make sure that you build in some kind of physical activity after 10 pages, and whether it's just to stand up and do some stretches, to walk across the room, anything that you can do to get the blood circulating again. Now, some of you are more artistic, and so you may be able to take notes by drawing or using diagrams as you record your notes in addition to words. At the end, when you fill up the first side of the page, you notice that there's that summary blank at the bottom of the Cornell note paper. In that summary, in your own words, you should sum up what you have written on this page so far. Summaries are always far shorter than the original. So in 2 or 3 sentences, you should be able to encapsulate what it is that you've read about so far and what you've taken notes on so far. Also, another tip or a pointer for you for studying is that you shouldn't stay with the same subject for more than an hour at a time. Our brains need downtime from each subject in order for that information to transfer from short-term and our current working memory into long-term memories. One of the things that the textbook reading that you did mentioned is that there are patterns that textbook authors often use. There's an explanatory pattern, which is what most textbooks seem to use. In this chapter, you're going to learn the 7 different ways that And that's so you know that ahead of time what it is that the basic gist of the chapter is going to be about. Some other textbooks will use more of a comparison contrast, and so they'll say, now we've studied this particular approach to matrimony in these countries. Now let's look at what marriage looks like in these countries. And so you're reversing. Instead of continuing with the same topic, you're branching out and taking a new topic on. So writing while you're reading is critical because it helps you to, first of all, remember what you read. And also, here's another interesting fact. Recent research has revealed that when you handwrite your notes, the information is stored in one area of your brain. But when you type your notes up from your handwritten notes, that is stored in a different part of the brain. So handwritten notes are of great value to you because that memory is one that you want to be able to access again. Also, when you're writing, you're checking your own comprehension and you're maintaining concentration. You know how it is. Sometimes we read a chapter, we read 10, 15 pages, we look up, and we have no idea what we read. If you use active reading strategies like the Cornell note-taking, you'll never have to face that again. So there are a number of strategies listed on this slide that I'll let you read over. These strategies are called annotations, and we'll be dealing with annotations in depth in a future lesson. But if you do have a book that you can write in, or if the instructor has given you a handout, it's really a great idea to make some markings directly on that reading. If you have a textbook but you don't want to make marks in it, you can always use Post-it notes as a way of recording your ideas and just leave them in the chapter until the end of the semester. The next step in the process it comes after we have finished reading that section. So we want to be able to do some recall activities right away. Some of the things that you can do, I like the Cornell note-taking paper because you can just simply fold that paper so that only the questions are visible to you. And then you can look away and try to answer the questions in your own words. And then you could always unfold the paper to check to see if you were accurate or not. You can write a summary of the material, as we mentioned earlier. All of these things will help as well. Other ways that you can recall your information is to make a diagram or a drawing. Anytime that you take written words and transform them into something else, you are doing a great service to yourself to transfer that information to long-term memory. You could ask a classmate or a roommate to quiz you on the material, or any other of the methods that you might use to see if you know how much you remember from that reading. And the reason that you want to do this recall is the rate of forgetting is the fastest right after you finish reading. And by recalling or repeating, it really slows down that rate of forgetting. Now here's some interesting research that's been done, and it really challenges some things that we used to think about the way the brain works and about the way memories are created. Well, when it comes to remembering, the most important thing is distributed practice. That means you work with it for a while, you leave it alone, you come back to it another day, and the struggle to try to remember is what really forges these deep and long-lasting neural pathways in your brain that stores the information. Any of you who have ever tried to just cram for an exam the night before realize that you often get to the exam and you are like a blank slate. You've forgotten everything that you crammed for. And that's because when you cram, you only push the information into short-term memory and maybe working memory for the time, but it does not get into long-term memory. And this particular chart really tells the tale. Let's say that you went to a class, and it was a class on chemistry. And there was a good deal of lecturing, and there was some work, and there were some hands-on experiences, and there was some reading that you did, and everything else. And when you leave the class, you know 100% of what you know. Now, I'm not saying you know 100% of what was covered in class, but you know 100% of what you know. The thing is is that take a look at the black curved line. By the second day, if you have done nothing once you walked out of that classroom until through 24 hours, you have lost up to 80% of the information that you gained. We have to interfere with this. We have to review in order to be able to maintain some of that information. So if you spend just 10 minutes sometime during that 24-hour period from when the information was first presented until the end of that 24 hours, you'll be able to keep your rate of remembering up at that 80 to 90% level. After the first day or two of spending 10 minutes reviewing your notes, cut it down. Just spend maybe 5 minutes then for the rest of the week. And by the end of the month, if you spend 2 minutes a day reviewing those notes, you will have them committed. You will enter that exam fully knowing all the information that you've covered. But it takes that distributed practice over time in order to make a good lasting memory. So the review step of SQ3R takes place right after you finish the entire assignment. And so I've given you this little mathematical expression to help guide you. Within 24 hours, spend 10 minutes reviewing. Within a week, spend 5 minutes each day. And after that first week, spend 2 to 4 minutes looking at those notes on a daily basis. This helps us to, as we accumulate notes from additional days, it helps us to see how the parts of the text fit together. And it helps you to revise maybe what you had as some initial thoughts in the chapter as you add new information to what you know. So reviewing right after you complete the assignment helps to anchor that information in your memory. It gives you a sense of maybe what pieces of the chapter weren't quite as clear to you and might need a second reading. And it keeps the big picture in view for you as well. So how can you review? Lots of ways. You can look at the major headings and try to recall the general point that was introduced. You can work with a friend to ask you questions about those. You can take your notes and try to transform them into a different format. You know, if you took notes by drawing illustrations, then try to create maybe an outline or create text to go with those illustrations that you drew. Other things that you can do are to create diagrams that show relations of how the ideas fit together. Again, anytime we manipulate this, we ask our brain to do the task of transforming the information, and that helps to commit it to long-term memory. Now, for years, the studies have said that you should always study the subject in the same location. But now we're finding in the recent research that's been done that if you change locations purposefully each time you sit down to study that subject, it's really better for you. By changing to a different location, it makes the brain struggle a bit to come back to understanding, and that struggle is actually works in our favor in terms of creating memories. There are a few strategies for reading that work in many situations, but not every strategy that you're going to learn about during the semester will work for every single subject. So you need to be a flexible reader. You need to always ask yourself, how much background knowledge do I have about this subject already? How much of this is brand new material to me? And that's going to help you to be this flexible reader, to approach the material in a way that makes sense for you and your background and the new material. Now, I can't close off this recording without a word on multitasking. All of us think that we are so much better at multitasking than we actually are. We've got the TV on, we've got our phone laying on the table by us that buzzes and chirps to let us know with each and every email coming in or message. And all I can say is don't do it. At least don't do it while you're studying. I tend to, when I have to concentrate on something, I put my phone in a different room, and I use that as my reward or my break between reading sections of the chapter. So then I'll go and check my email after reading 5 pages and catch up on what's going on, and then I'll come back, review the notes that I had so far, and then take on the next several pages of reading. Because, you know, we really look a lot like this character from Up, and I'm hoping...
I always think of this video clip from the movie Up when we're talking about multitasking.
My master made me this collar. He is a good and smart master, and he made me this collar so that I may talk. Squirrel!
Yep, we're a lot like that. We're like a squirrel every time that cell phone of ours chirps at us. So just get it away from yourself while you're trying to concentrate and try to remove as many distractions as you possibly can. Now, another thing, and a final word on this, is that you can do for yourself is to make sure that you're not reading too slowly. Many people think that they have to approach tasks of reading textbooks in a very slow and methodical manner, but that's not true. You should be able to keep reading at about 200 to 250 words per minute. So what I did was I put together a little exercise here for you to do. Choose a textbook from another class and then set a countdown timer on your phone for a minute, and then start reading and see, and then when the minute is up, see how many words you actually read. And if you're far short of the 250, try to push yourself to read a bit faster the next time, because sometimes reading too slow can be defeating. And that concludes this video. Best wishes to you as you continue with your assignments for this week.